Professor Petra, you have the floor.
Thank you very much for your generous introduction, and thank you also very much for inviting me. It's a great honor and privilege to be here with you this morning in the UK, very early morning, a sunny morning. I will share my screen in a second, but I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate you to this fantastic forum, but also to the wider initiatives that you have in mind, and to this outreach to others, and to start this process of learning from others and with other centers, because that is something I'm really interested in. And this is actually how I met Karma and how this whole connection came into being at COP27 when I met her. So thank you again very much for having me here today, and for tolerating that I can't be with you in person, which I would have preferred, but for family reasons, it's unfortunately not possible at this point in time. So I trust you can see my slides. Is that correct? Can you see?
We can.
Okay, perfect. So thank you very much. It's a very condensed, short, brief overview over the center, which is still in early stage of development. We started this process on the back of work that was undertaken across the university after the Glasgow COP. I would like to stress 3 strands throughout this presentation, and that are the main drivers that are behind this initiative, behind this center, because you can well ask, do we really need another center, another university research group? There are already so many, but I think we are distinct in 3 ways. So what is driving this initiative is really the attempt to collaborate with others, to reach out to other centers like the center that you are founding, but also others, and I've got more on my slides, to have even a memorandum of understanding and to have joint projects for our students, but also for our research, for our convenership more widely, for our impact activities. And I think this is very beneficial for many projects. The second strand is the interdisciplinarity. What I noticed was that the whole COP process, the whole UNFCCC process is sometimes not conceived as the legal lawmaking and policy-making process that it is. And I thought it would be very beneficial to bring those who produce, for example, the scientific evidence more into this lawmaking process. So I started to think around how could I bring those people together to establish stronger connections, to then utilize the fact that we as a university have, for example, now observer status with the Convention on Biological Diversity, but also with the UNFCCC process. So how can we use these new responsibilities, really? How can we act upon them and make submission, for example, to the global stocktake and other thematic areas? And the third strand is how can we produce the research, and I think this came already out in the first contribution to this conference that I just saw. How can we make a contribution for others to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions? And this concerns mainly countries who are in the early stages of their energy transition, but who also want to have development. So how can we ensure that if they decide, and some of them, as you know, do decide to also use fossil fuels, how can we ensure that this happens in the context of a wider energy transition? And I think each context is very specific, each country is very specific, so we can't claim to have a solution for them all, but to work with particular countries, and there's a lot of work to do to ensure that they have some additional insights and some best practices that can be summarized through the research that we have the ability to undertake. So let me just go to the next slide. I think I can't. Yeah, it's moving. So this brings us to the next slide. There you can see Durham Cathedral from the 11th century, so a very old building. It's protected by World UNESCO. It's a heritage site. So if you ever make the way up to Durham, please come and visit us. It's well worth a trip. So the mission really, to summarize, of this center is to advance sustainable development through research across intersecting thematic areas and incorporating science into policy and law. And I think this is a mutually enhancing process. It's not that the science guides the law, it's also that the law or lawyers need to ask the right questions. So it's really a conversations. It's not one leading the other. It's a mutually enforcing process. Now, the motivation is to educate the next generation of climate lawyers and climate leaders, but also to support other countries in their sustainable development and to provide capacity enhancing mechanisms, training, for example, to leaders in those countries. Now, this is something we also do. We educate our students. This is the climate law and policy class. And as you can see in the middle, there's Justice Preston, who just delivered last week, actually, a lecture on the Gloucester case. All smiles, the students were very happy to learn how detailed the argument is and how a good argument is made in climate adjudication. So that is part of the teaching side of things. And this is also something that ties in with the teaching. We are developing new courses to attract students to come to join us, and also to join us, not just to learn from us, but also for us to learn from them, from their country-specific context, their challenges, and the problems that they are facing in the context of climate change, biodiversity loss, and environmental degradation. So we've got a new LLM in international environmental law, a very exciting process. But of course, developing all the SDGs or embedding them into our academic life is still challenging. There are sometimes tensions, and we have to work together. And this is another picture that underlines that we really want to bring everyone in. You can see here members of the university from all 4 faculties, sciences, humanities, arts. Everyone is involved in our center. Now, in terms of the strand that I mentioned about the outreach and how we collaborate with others, this is an example of a memorandum of understanding that we had the opportunity to sign in Singapore with my very dear colleague, Professor Niloufar Oral, who's the director of the Center for International Law. So that was a very important milestone in these early development stages of our center. And several projects have already been completed in the past, and we've got others in the pipeline, and I will say a few words about this. So these are some of the projects that we have already completed. Some are still ongoing. Now there are various research projects with countries, including Uganda, Laos, PDR, in terms of supporting hydroelectricity projects. And by supporting, I mean supporting them in a way that the SDGs are implemented in the wider aspects of these projects. So not just pursuing a certain project and then neglecting the interests of perhaps communities that are affected by the project. We've got the Durham Global Environmental Law Lecture Series, where we've got justices from leading courts, highest courts around the world, talking about how they have implemented international environmental instruments into their in their jurisdictions, how they've used them in their reasoning. For example, we had a justice from the Supreme Court of India, of South Africa, Barbados, so the East African Court of Justice, and of course New South Wales, Justice Preston was also there, and the former justice of the Federal Constitutional Court in Germany, who delivered this Neubauer judgment, or who was part of the Senate that delivered the order, I should say, in the Neubauer case, as you may know. Now, in terms of our projects at COP, we had the Education Hub, and this is where I met Karma for the first time. She was in the audience, and we had a really fruitful conversation after the Education Hub event. You can see 1 p.m. that was our collaboration in research and education Center for Sustainable Development Law and Policy. Very much hope we can build on that in the future for the next COP. Now, this is something we've done with support of the UNFCCC Secretariat, a two-workshop series where we were exploring how generally the global stocktake is being formed as a process in international law, but also how the oceans are tied in, and especially the ocean dialogue into the global stocktake as a process. So it's something that we've done in the light of our memorandum of understanding with CIL. Here you can see this again. It's two parts of the workshop. Based on that, we are now convening a conference again, two parts. One part will be in Durham and one part in Singapore. And if you are interested in joining us, in joining this endeavor to bring in some of the academic perspectives into the global stocktake, please get in touch. I would be delighted to welcome you, to host you in Durham. We are now planning for the 22nd and 23rd of June. So with that, I will end here, and I'm looking forward to more questions. It was a very brief overview, and I hope it was in some part at least, interesting and beneficial for your purposes. And thank you again very much for having me.
Thank you, Professor Petra, and for sharing with us a brief overview of the work and the initiative your center has undertaken. I think it's interesting to learn especially the kind of work that you've done in advancing sustainable development through research across thematic areas and incorporating science into law and policy. So thank you for that wonderful presentation.